No, because at the end of the day, it's not about your time at 2 o'clock in the afternoon when life is good. It's about when
Right.
that bug hits production. That's when the stress
Right.
hits. How quickly can
Right.
you analyze and fix that? And if you're not
Right.
already practicing that every day on your local machine, you're dead. This is why
Right.
I tell people stop using debuggers.
Right.
Don't use a
Right.
debugger to find bugs. Use a debugger to learn a mental model of a code base that you've never seen before.
Yep.
Debuggers
Yeah.
trace. They don't find bugs. They trace code. It's
Yeah.
great. I got a piece of
Right.
code here. I don't know how it works. Okay, I'll step through it with the
Right.
debugger, but you got to get out of it.
Right. Welcome, Will. Really, I mean, we've known each other for a while, and I mean, your work in the whole industry has been really commendable. And I have so many questions, so I'm going to reserve them for asking them one by one. The first one that I have is, how did you become an engineer? I don't know nothing about your background. Just tell me, how did engineering attract you? Software engineering.
Real quick, I don't know, I must have been in junior high school or freshman, maybe a freshman in high school. My parents just brought home this computer from Radio Shack. Literally just connected it to your TV. You had to connect a cassette player to it to be able to save and load anything. And it had BASIC on it. And I don't know, within about 2 weeks, just it was consuming all my time when I got home from school. And I think I kind of maxed it out within a couple of weeks. And then I was fortunate enough for my parents, who were not wealthy at all, but I guess saw the value in it, invested about $1,500 in a K Pro 2, which was
Wow.
amazing. CPM, like it was the next level. Like I think I lived on that machine for
What
years.
year was this?
That had to be, I think I got the K Pro in 86. It must have been like my junior year, 85, 86. I got that K Pro 2. It was one of these quote unquote portable computers. It had the
Yep.
cover, you could pick it up. I mean, the thing weighed, God knows, probably weighed more than I did at the time. Um, but all I did was learn basic and wrote a ton of games that I couldn't even win. I don't play games because I just can't win in games, even the ones I was writing. And then eventually I got that upgraded to an IBM, not an IBM, but a K Pro sort of PC with the MS DOS at that point, and then that carried me all the way through college. That machine, but I think when I fell in love with that K Pro, I just knew that this is what I wanted to do. Right, I just wanted to be a software developer. The funny thing is when I got my first job out of university, and there was no work. I got this first job in '92. There was like no work, and I did not have any pedigree in terms of my. I went to a state university, which was fine, but I enjoyed having fun more than going to class. So I didn't have the best GPA coming out of college. It was tough to find a job back. It took me literally 8 months to find a job, and I took this job for $18,000 a year in 1992 because it was the only job I could get. But the job really was, it was a mix of software, writing C code, and having to do basically IT, fix machines, install networks. I became a Novell certified engineer at the time in these 2 years. And about 2 years into that, I had to make a choice. Did I want to continue down the path of being like that CNE, that certified Novell engineer, and stay in the ops world, or get into software? And I decided software for one reason. At least back then, when something broke, if you didn't have the parts, it wasn't going to get fixed. And I hated that. I hated being basically handcuffed to not being able to fix a problem because you didn't have the hardware, which taught me to constantly have duplicates of everything over time. But with software, at least if you wrote it, you could fix it. And so I really kind of went down that path. And my second job was in Miami at a hospice named Vitas. And I just, at that point, just went heads down and focused on software dev.
Interesting. Interesting. So, so you got into software and you're saying that, like back then there was very little jobs as well. How did you decide to, like, and this has always amazed me. almost everybody starts their career, as a fascination with computers. Whoever I've met, they got fascinated with it. But during this course, how do you start fueling yourself? When is that the first gratification and reward that you get and say, I got to make a career out of this thing, and this is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life? What was that moment?
I knew right away because I wasn't really interested in much of anything else. I played a lot of sports, but at basically like 5'2" and 100 pounds wet, you weren't going to do anything professionally, right? Um, and I love sports, and I spent a lot of time outside. But from a career perspective, I just loved writing code and watching things happen. I knew that was going to be my path. Like it wasn't even going to be an option for me. If I wasn't outside and hanging out, I was in my room just sort of banging out code. And if I didn't have the computer in front of me, I was writing it on paper at times. So I don't know. I just felt this. The funny thing is, my dad was a musician, really good musician. And at the time I got that K Pro, I'd also been given a guitar. I got these two things at the same time. And I always laugh because I'm like, we know which one won out. Like I cannot play guitar. Okay. I I ended up just you always gravitate to the things that you want to do. I hate when people say I don't have time for that because that's wrong. You just don't have the attention for it. You always make time for the things you want to do. And I just kept making time for the computer, not the guitar.
Yeah. This is very interesting. I almost got a sneak peek into the sort of person that you are and the way you approach this, because my next question to you was, you mentioned 92 was your first job, right? By the clock, if I measure right now, that's been 30 years, right? Now, 30 years into the software industry, I only have one question for you. How do you stay relevant and interested? Give me a quick one for this one. Like what's your recipe here?
I'm not the kind of person who actually loves change. Anytime something has to change in my life, it starts with a moment of depression and kind of just exhaustion. And then I have to fight through that for a month or two. And then I get excited about the fact that I'm learning. So, sort of as an example, in 2013, I had to switch to Go because we had to get off of Windows as a company. We just had to get off of Windows. So, suddenly I had to learn a new programming language and a new operating system in like March of 2013. I was depressed. I knew Windows inside and out. I could code anything in C sharp. And now I'm starting from scratch again. And probably within a few months, I started feeling like I could be productive again and be productive on my machine and not be clueless and be productive programming and then the excitement sort of starts to come in and um, because I feel like I'm not a complete idiot, right? Or I'm not completely
Right.
clueless. So that's one problem that I have. It's just I know I need to learn something new every year, but it's just kind of feeling like especially at my age, right? You're 53 and you have no idea what this is, and you feel like you need to learn it, and there's going to be a struggle, but you just got to put the hours in every day. So, and at my age, it's a little bit easier than let's say it was when I was starting out, because when you're starting out, you got to work, you got to bring in money. I had kids at an early age. At 26, I had my first kid. This idea of funcation that I see sometimes on Twitter, I don't get it. This idea that somebody can just like, I don't like my job, so I'm just going to quit for 3 months. That
Yeah.
blows my mind, dude. I've never been in that situation. I've always had somebody I've had to keep alive, right? I told my wife recently, I'm like, I don't want to keep anything else alive. Can we just like, no more like animals, no more nothing. I'm done, right? I got all these kids, but I, I've always had to keep kids alive. Like, there's no like, I'm not happy with my job. I'm going to quit. Like, it's freaking
Right.
insane to me. The whole thought is insane. Even now, where I probably have enough financial freedom to just, I don't think I could. My stomach would hurt thinking that I don't have some income coming in. So, um, so the bottom line is when you're younger, I think there's probably more stress to have to learn things maybe you don't want to learn because you got to have the income coming in, and the job is what the job is until you can maybe find a new
Yeah.
one. But now at my
Right.
age, what's nice is I get to sort of maybe feel the waters on something and ask
Uh-huh.
myself honestly, are you feeling any passion for this? Is this getting you excited? No? Fine,
Right.
I'm not going to do it. I don't care if the industry thinks that everybody on the planet
Right.
should know this. You know how long it took me to
Right.
start learning Kubernetes?
Right.
Probably 5 years from the time that Kelsey first talked about it, right?
Yeah.
And I had lots of friends feeling like I'm falling behind. I don't know Kubernetes. And I'm like, I don't really
Right.
care. I'm just not passionate about it. Eventually, I had to learn it
Right.
because it became important from a business perspective, right? And again, I'm depressed that I had to learn this stuff, super complicated. But over a few years, I'm comfortable with it now. So
Right.
you just got to find that thing that you don't mind putting your attention to. Again, it's not about time. What is
Right.
it about? And don't lie to
Right.
yourself that you have some form of attention to something that you don't, because it's
Right.
obvious to see what you're actually spending
No, amazing.
them on.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I usually have an opinion here. You say that, of all the things that we can fake, attention is something we cannot fake.
So then back to your question about um, early years being formative to learn how to learn. I think the one thing that college did for me, and I think the one thing that college can do for someone, it's not necessarily learn a particular tech, because we know tech is changing every year. It's learning how to solve problems. I think it's learning how to be a programmer where you can find code and find solutions that work for a happy path. Um, what you don't have time to learn in university and what you have to learn outside of university. And I don't know if you can learn this without having the right people around and having a desire for it, is the engineering piece.
Right.
Having that
Right.
desire to change that programming and turn it into a, a piece of code or system that's resilient, right, and
Right.
maintainable and
Right.
manageable. Um, I,
Right.
I have known people who don't care about that. They just want to
Right.
bang out some
Right.
code and get it working. Life is good. I don't want to work with those people. Um,
Right. Right.
so I think the formative years needs to be where you're in an environment where you're allowed to fail, you're picked back up, and you're told keep going forward. I just had I just saw something recently where oh we had it at a client where one of our guys made a big mistake, brought down production for a couple hours, and they wanted to fire him. And I'm like, dude, if you fire him, you got to fire me and everybody that I know, because there isn't one person that hasn't done something to a production system that cared about the job they were doing, right? I rather have
Right.
somebody on my team that brought down production this year for a couple hours than somebody who I didn't even know existed on the team, who's doing more for me
Right.
at the end of the day. And so I think you need to have a culture where you want people to do things without the and do things right. Don't make the same mistake twice. But things happen,
Right.
okay?
Right.
Like
Right.
like I would more question the process and the access they had to bring down production than the fact that they brought it down, right?
Right.
Um,
Right.
so I think the early years for anyone has to be about learning how to minimize mistakes but not be afraid
Right.
of sharing the mistake. I was in a shop. We had this 16 size, like 16 shack level sneaker. We painted it gold. We called it the boot. And anytime somebody made a mistake, whether it brought down production or it brought down developers from working, they would write up what
You,
they did and they put it in the boot, and the boot would be on your desk. And there were
wow, I thought you
times,
were gonna make them wear the boot.
no, 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 it's on your desk. So everybody sees you have the
Yeah.
boot. You could keep the boot for a week, a month, or an hour. There were times where I got up out of my desk, walked over
Right.
to the desk that had the boot, and everybody would stop working and look at me. And I would just
All
grab the
right.
boot and walk up. Like I didn't even wait for the ceremony. I just knew this was mine. And everybody was like, oh man, what did Bill just do? And the point of
Right.
the boot wasn't to shame anybody. It was quite the opposite. It was to show
Right.
that we're a team. We all make mistakes. We fix those mistakes,
Embrace the failure. Yeah. Yeah.
embrace it, and own it. Don't hide it.
Yeah.
Own it, because if you hide it, we can't fix anything.
Right.
And then
Right.
at the end of the year, we would take all the papers out of the boot and read them and just laugh for like an hour because those
Right.
problems were no longer problems, right? And we would just
Absolutely.
laugh at ourselves that we made these sorts
Right.
of mistakes.
That takes me to a very, I don't know. I mean, this is naturally flowing into my next question, which is you've seen software for a very long time, and all of these stories make it, like our journey through this software to be where we understand both things equally. One, it has to be reliable, it has to work. At the same time, we know mistakes are going to happen. If you wear that lens again, what would you say do you see as missing in the end software engineering landscape? I know it's a very generic question here, but what are those prominent things that come to your head, when you look at software engineering today, the practices that are happening? I'm going to dwell down on this further. I've got nuanced things here that I want to talk about. But do you believe that as an industry where we are right now, if we have to progress, what do you find as missing? Like today, what do you wish as a greenfield, if you were to come with, I wish there was this aspect of software engineering which would actually improve in general. Like, what would that be?
The same thing that's missing today was missing 30 years ago. It's the attitude. It's this attitude that that I'm responsible for the code that I write, right? This
Uh-huh.
attitude
Say more.
that I'm not responsible, right? Like every developer is responsible for the software they write. And they have to understand the production environment they're working in. So I'll give you an example. I have met
Right.
early in my career, I was working in a lot of enterprise companies where there were IT departments. When I say IT department, I mean people who were writing software for the internal organization so they could do things, right? I had found over all that time that anytime I met an engineer or developer that was an IT developer, their software broke all the time. And it was because they always had this attitude that they could walk over to the desk of the person where it broke and just do some debugging there and patch it and get it out. It was like their work motto was get something done fast that seems to work, and if it breaks, it's no big deal because I'm just affecting something internal or this particular human being, and I'll patch it really quickly and they'll be up and running. So their entire life is just about banging out a bunch of code, however, and then
And
fixing it
reacting.
every day as it goes on. And the attitude that also comes with that is this is my job security. Why would I ever build the software in such a way that it just worked or somebody else could take it over? Because then I'm going to be replaced and I want to have that job security. So I don't know where these mentalities come from, but almost my entire career, I would not hire who I thought were IT based developers because it was so hard to get the idea out of their head that you're not allowed to touch production. You're responsible for the code you write. You should have this desire that nobody finds bugs unless they're like crazy edge cases. And you need to have that idea that you are just a steward and it's not about job security, it's about your ability to grow. And if somebody can't take over
Right.
the software you're writing, then I can't even promote you. You're worried about
Right.
not getting fired. I'm worried about not being promoted because somebody says we
Right.
can't lose you in this position, right?
Right.
There has to be
Right.
this sort of change in mentality. When I was
Right.
running software shops prior to Arden, I would make everybody that started my team work for at least 2 weeks in the QA department. People would
Uh-huh.
treat the QA engineers like shit. There's no other word for it. Shit.
Right.
They put
Right.
code in there, they'd find a bug, and they'd argue with QA whether it was a bug or not, or this or that.
Right.
And I
Right.
said, you know what?
No. Yeah.
That ends. All of you start your jobs on my team in QA, usually for at least 2 weeks. And that stuff stopped immediately. One, because they were finding bugs in those weeks and having to interact with developers. Two, they created relationships with these people. And three, they understand the importance of not slowing down QA because you decided not to test something that was so obviously
Right.
broken. And I would also
Right.
do things like this on a Friday during the summer. I'd be like, okay, everybody at your desks. If you can find 3 bugs in the next hour, real bugs in the next hour, you can go home early.
Right. Where does this love for quality of software come from? Like, is it like, do you feel like how do you what makes you passionate about this quality of software? Which
Because
I do agree with you, I find it missing in many people that I've met.
when I say that you need to be responsible for the code you write, it's coming from a place of empathy. There's a real human being on the other side of that that is having potentially a really bad day. We know we have a mental health crisis all over the planet today, much worse than we ever
Right,
did. Your
right,
bug, think about this for a second. We're the only industry, and I didn't make this up, I don't remember where I heard this from. We are the only industry where people's lives are at risk and we're not licensed to do our job. Uh, think about it.
beautiful, profound,
And
you know,
so you might
gold.
say, well, Bill, I don't work on embedded healthcare equipment. No, but your bug on that site, whatever it is, could be the final straw in somebody's bad day. And so it may not be directly related to their heartbeat, but it's directly
Right,
related to their mental health at that moment in time. And so you should not be writing code. I don't care if you're a back end developer and you feel like your code doesn't touch, your code's driving the front end. You need to have empathy for the people that are using your
yeah,
software. And if you don't, again, get out of this industry. So that's where it comes from. It also comes from the idea
right,
that I've had to wake up way too many times in my life at 3 o'clock in the morning to deal with somebody
right,
else's problem. Okay.
right,
Like that's not
right,
fair. And back in the day in the 90s, I would get paid for that at least. I used to like needed
right,
extra cash. I would take the phone home. People eventually started realizing I was making like an extra 1,000 a month and they started competing for the phone with me, which really pissed me off. But today, I
right.
don't know what happened. You get on, I've heard stories now that you're on call. You don't get like paid to bring the phone home for that week at night. Like that's even worse. So there's people lives that
Yeah,
involved everywhere. And if you don't have empathy for them, again, what are you doing?
right.
Why are you here?
Amazing, Bill, because you know, and I'm gonna say two opinions here. Like one is probably I'm gonna conclude what you just said is uh when you say people have to own up the software that we write, like uh I say this uh having seen this over a while, I say software is almost permanent. Your job is maybe ephemeral in it. So what you do, make sure that it actually falls in line because the software is actually permanently going to be there because it's there as a part of our lives, uh, and that takes me to the next thing I wanted to actually touch upon, and you profoundly already have mentioned this. I keep telling this to a lot of people that I meet. If you look around, these days, every moment of your life, start till the end of it. Like let's imagine a very quiet moment. You're having a dinner, and you say, "Hey Alexa, can you play a song?" In this moment, you're basically relying on a piece of software to add to that music, or you're running out, you're having a dinner, you run out of something, you DoorDash it. Imagine if the payment did not go through, how infuriating would be. And I'm talking about good cases here, not situations where lives matter on it. There are other parts of it, while you're running your car, software is all around you. Software has become such a permanent part of our lives that our moments, we don't even assume, we don't even pay attention to the fact that there's a software running underneath and it touches our lives on daily basis. It is so much around us that our lives would be dysfunctional if the software stopped working around it. And it adds to these moments. It makes our lives, it makes us happy, it makes us sad, it makes us infuriated. It can change our mood in a day and it touches us in so many places. And you said it really well here that we are not licensed practitioners. With the amount of responsibility we have on our head to deliver something where people almost carelessly look past it even. It's so subtle and so underneath in our lives that we move past it assuming, hey, this thing is always going to work. Right?
So when people ask me what I do, you know what I tell them? I tell them I build air conditioners. And they're like, "What?" I go, you're in a room right now, right? Yeah, yeah. Are you comfortable? Yeah, I'm comfortable. Have you, either of you, even on this call today, have thought about the air conditioning system once in all the time that we've been talking here? Of course not.
No,
Why?
it just
Because
works.
it's working. But if that AC breaks down, not only is it you're going to feel it immediately, it's going to consume the rest of your day. We need
Right,
to get into this attitude that we build air conditioners, that we don't even know that the system, that nobody knows the systems we're building even exists. That
right,
the idea is nobody in your company other than your team should even know who you are, especially if you're a back end developer. Right? I always say if you want the
yeah,
oohs and the ahs, become a front end dev. But I promise you, you're going to spend hours on a screen. You're going to show it to somebody, and they're not going to say good job. They're going to say I don't like this. So I couldn't be a front
right,
end dev.
right.
Right? It's just a constant feedback of negativity on all the time you do. But if you're a back end dev, your job has to be, your attitude has to be, I'm building air conditioners. Nobody's going to know my name in this company because my stuff's just going to work and it's always going to work. And it's that
Perfect.
that's the attitude. I want everybody to say I build air
Right,
conditioners.
right. No, amazing. Like I would like to end this passage of ours with saying the hallmark of the work that we do as software engineers is to deliver these moments for our users, exceed their expectations time and again, even when they're not actively paying attention to the software underneath, or if I say in other words that you just said, it just works. So much so that they don't even realize it.
If they have to
That
think
takes
about the
me
software, we failed. I tried to buy something
absolutely
yesterday. I tried to buy a silly thing from my business partner yesterday. I went on their website, I filled in the form, I hit the button, and they said a bunch of fields weren't filled in, and they were. And I looked at it. I must have spent 3 minutes, and I finally said, you know what? You don't get my money now. Like
yeah,
that moment was horrific, right?
gone.
They
Yeah,
that form shouldn't even play into my head. At this point, I know how to fill it
right,
in. It doesn't even
right,
register. And these are the moments that we've got to create. Nobody should even be thinking about the website or the web page
right,
or the button. It's just there.
right. I have a very controversial opinion here that I want to ask you. We can conclude almost to say that software is of utmost relevance to us in modern human life. I'm going to ask you a question. It's been 30 years. Do you think software engineering is still relevant? The fact that we have not been able to address this hallmark of quality? I agree, software is relevant, but is the engineering still relevant? Or do we need better ways around it?
I didn't I didn't come up with this quote. The biggest downfall of civilization is going to be legacy software. Forget about earthquakes, forget about tornadoes and hurricanes and asteroids. That's not how civilization is going to end. It's going to end because all of this legacy software that we have is eventually going to break down and nobody's going to know how to fix it. So this
Mm,
idea of engineering excellence is even more important today than maybe it ever was because the systems are much more complex and the integrations are much deeper. What I'm seeing from the industry today are systems like Service Weaver that are
right,
trying to have developers write the minimal amount of code they need to solve a business problem, and then
right,
all of the code underneath that to deploy it and manage it in production
right,
is sort of taking care of you. I'm seeing that now more and more. There's Darklang tries to do the same thing.
right,
There's another programming language or system that somebody just shared with me. I don't
right.
know if these are I like Service Weaver only because you still at least own all the stack because it's Go. But I don't
Right.
know how excited I am about some of these other systems because they're so black boxed that if those companies go out, like
Yeah.
like what do you have? So, but I'm seeing the industry trying to create more and more boilerplate, more and more sort of tooling you don't have to touch, right? We've always said that Kubernetes eventually will become similar to the operating system. Nobody will ever run a
OS of the world. Yeah.
control command unless you're really like deep in the bowels of something, right? But remember, every layer creates more and more opportunity for bugs, more and more opportunities for problems, more and more things that somebody has to have a mental model of. So
Right.
we have to be really careful as an industry how much abstraction we're throwing at things. And sometimes I think you should be removing abstractions out, not necessarily adding. Um,
Right.
but but it's, I think, no different than climate change, man. I mean, we're screaming about climate change today, and we're doing very, very little about it. We're talking about this, and there are some solutions coming in. But I think the world wants to move so fast to market and so fast to try to solve certain problems that they just want to build a Jenga game, and
Yeah.
eventually there's going
Right.
to be too many holes.
You said a very interesting point here, that and abstractions and like how the world is shipping logic and not owning the stack. I have this opinion here, and it gets me thinking. I'm sitting in a WeWork right now, and here's a great, I would say, a similarity that I see. Uh, industry in the past, businesses used to own real estate, the real estate of an office. They would run the entire operation themselves. What they did was WeWork came along and said, let me abstract all of this for you. You simply come in, do your work, and leave the entire office space, the entire management to us. And here we are, right? So it kind of like disrupted that. I see a parallel in the modern software for very similar situation happening here, right? Bring your business logic. Everything else is not owned by you. The cloud, the orchestrator, the operating system, everything is rented. You see what I'm saying here, right? The entire life of the software is living on rent anymore. Like devs don't own the stack. You don't own the real physical estate anymore. It almost old school, seen as that with this very little control, I would say. Like, of course, there's a lot of freedom now because you don't have to worry about a lot of things. But at the same time, when you say I don't have to worry about a lot of things, it directly translates to I have no control over those things as well. Now, as a software person who's shipping software, building software, this lack of control over performance, over security, over cost, or the black box, does that make you uncomfortable? And it almost becoming a modern norm, trying to do a thing against it would literally be going against the tide. What's your opinion on that?
Let me give you an analogy. Okay. I'm at a point in my life where I don't want to own a home anymore. I'm
Right.
fortunate to have two homes, and I don't want to own them anymore because the amount of money that I have to put in to both these houses every week, right? Waiting for the next thing to break, dealing with the next situation that comes. I'm at a point where I'd rather just rent and let it be somebody else's problem, right?
Right.
Refrigerator breaks. Hey, you got to fix the fridge. The lawn isn't great. That's your, like, I don't want the responsibility of owning and maintaining these homes anymore.
Right.
I think it's
Right.
the same sort of, because the out of cost pocket and the upgrades that I'd have to do over time
Hmm.
is super expensive, and it weighs down on you from as a burden. I think the
Right.
same thing is what the cloud does is a matter of you running your own data centers. I've run my own data
Right.
centers before. I've had to buy
Right.
computers and stack them up. I've had to worry about maintaining them and upgrading them. I've had to worry about
Right.
all of that stuff over time. And you could almost argue that maybe the cost of running your own data center and being able to do all the tax work and blah, blah, blah is equivalent to using somebody's cloud. But two things.
Right.
One,
Right.
I can walk away from the cloud anytime I want. Now I got to figure out how to sell this stuff. And
Right.
two, if something breaks, I don't have to deal with it so much as make a phone call. So
Right.
I'm super happy with the idea of renting those things
Right.
that we need, at
Right.
least at this point in my life. Now,
Right.
one thing you have to make a choice on, and I don't think it's as, I think it's easier now than maybe it was 10 years ago. Because I've always said that you should, if you want to keep things simple, then I call it going to bed. You should go to bed with a cloud provider. What do I mean? I mean, If you're going to choose Amazon, then use all the Amazon services that are there. Use everything
Right.
that's there and build your platform on that. You want to use Google, then go heads down
Right.
with Google. You want to use Microsoft, don't don't write abstractions with the idea that you want to get off that cloud one day, because you're
Understood.
adding
Right.
layers of abstraction that you now have to maintain, understand, and deal with. Now, some people will say, Bill, that's crazy. Why would I just fully integrate everything? Maybe I've never known somebody to get off of a cloud, just like I've never really known somebody to switch out a database. It just, and so if
Yeah.
you make that choice, there's less engineering for you to
Right.
manage, and you're then relying on that. Now, I think today things are really interesting. So we've been switching at Arden a lot of stuff out of um, Kubernetes in Google to Cloud Run. Cloud Run,
Right.
dude, is badass, right? It's
Right.
package your software, put it into an image, and they'll run it. They'll run it at scale. They'll run it everything. From an ops perspective, there's like almost little to nothing you need to do. And they have the ingress if you need it, and they have these things, and they can
Right.
scale it. And I
Right.
I want to see more engineering teams and platforms move back towards that. It used to be where you just got the Linode box and you ran your
Right.
stuff
Yeah.
there, and like, to me, Cloud Run is the same thing, except you're
Absolutely.
living on the
Linode. Yeah.
container and you can
Yeah.
scale at a different in a different level, right? So,
Right.
and with that, one could argue now you've somewhat stayed agnostic, except let's say you need a messaging system. Do you choose NATS?
Right.
I'm running an Amazon. Do you
Yeah.
choose, what is that, SQS? Do I? That's the decision you have to sort of make, right?
Right.
Um,
Right.
but I'd rather rent than own all day long, dude.
No, but take me back to that question. A while back you said that, the whole thing is becoming a black box. Now, in one place, and I get this dilemma, like I'm not saying that's a counter opinion, because it's, as an engineering leader, that's a dilemma that you're constantly under. You want to be living on a rent because owning is expensive, but at the same time, as you mentioned a while back, everything is a black box. And so how does that discomfort and comfort, like at what point does that marry together? Like the fear of a black box, at the same time the fear of owning. How do you practically decide between these two?
I just think that I'm not a networking guru. I don't want to manage machines. I trust that Amazon, Microsoft, and Google have got that down pretty well in 2023. So I
Right.
don't see the compute as a black box. I just see it
Right.
as a machine that I could own or they own. And I see the
Understood.
container as the delivery mechanic, which is the same delivery mechanic I use on my local machine, right?
Right.
And so
Got it.
so for me, I want to worry about everything above the container, and I want somebody
Right.
else to
Right.
worry about everything below the container, and the container is the
Got it.
handoff, right?
Understood.
I mean, think about it. I'm just asking you to run a piece of code at maybe
Right.
one or multiple instances of it on multiple machines. This is a solved
Right.
problem. I should not be building that
Absolutely.
myself, and I shouldn't be doing it manually anymore. This is a solved problem. The question is,
Right.
do you want to do it with Kubernetes? Do you want to do it with Cloud Run? Do you want to do it with whatever Amazon provides? You want to do it with,
Right.
choose your poison.
Interesting. So can I decrypt it this way? What you're basically, the undercurrent here is, as long as it is common knowledge, and I think that's a key word here. You know what we're kind of hinting at. If the knowledge is well known to us, then I don't care for it who manages it. So do not do magic for me. Take away the load of common knowledge. Is that what we're saying? Because that would that be a fair way
Yeah,
of saying
take
so?
away the
Kind.
burden of these things that are truly just at this point boilerplate, and right.
Right.
But
Right.
what's beautiful is if I can run the software on my local machine the same way, in a sense, it gets deployed off my machine,
Yeah.
then at
Right.
least when I'm debugging it, I'm working within the scope of some similar. I think that's one of the most
Right.
beautiful things about Kubernetes is I can run a full Kubernetes stack on my local machine, and
Right.
I'm developing the same way things are in production, I'm practicing every day. If I'm using
Right.
Cloud Run, it's the same thing. I'm just going to run it in Docker the same way I will
Right.
run it
Right.
there, right? The same form
Right.
of access control. So I think
Correct.
that is super important, right? Back in the day, the way we would run and debug software on our local machines were completely different than the way we had to do things
Right.
in production. I think containers and Kubernetes and things have kind of made your local environment at some level equal. We don't run at scale in our local machine, but at some level equal.
Correct.
So I don't want to deal with the things that, just like I don't want to write my own operating system.
Right.
I
Right.
expect that to just work, right? It's the same thing
Right.
at this point for me. Now, again, it depends on what level, what you think you need in terms of complexity. Keep it simple until you can. If Cloud Run
Correct.
works for you because you've decided smartly not to go down this crazy microservice sort of path, and you can build a single service that does everything for you right now, and you replicate
Right.
horizontally that way, then you can use Cloud Run, and there's almost no complexity in terms of deployment, right? But if you
Correct.
feel for some crazy reason that you need a little bit more control over
Hmm.
that service or more services, that's where Kubernetes can come in, because it can give you all the dials and switches that you want. So it always
Right.
comes, and the same thing when you're writing software. It's how much complexity do you want to put into this right now and why?
Right.
I want to keep it simple
Well,
until I can't.
right. So this whole WeWork model of software is about keeping things simple as long as what they're abstracting is common knowledge, which stays on my local and runs the exact same way where I'm running. So if it's homogeneous, it works well, right?
No, because at the end of the day, it's not about your time at 2 o'clock in the afternoon when life is good. It's about
Right.
when that bug hits production. That's when the stress
Right.
hits. How quickly can
Right.
you analyze and fix that? And if you're not
Right.
already practicing that every day on your local machine, you're dead. This is why
Right.
I tell people, stop using
Right.
debuggers. Don't use a
Right.
debugger to find bugs. Use a debugger to learn a mental model of a code base that you've never seen before.
Yep.
Debuggers
Yeah.
trace. They don't find bugs. They trace code. It's
Yeah.
great. I got a piece
Right.
of code here. I don't know how it works. Okay, I'll step through it with the
Right.
debugger, but you got to get out of it.
Right.
And so
Right.
you need to make sure your logs are working and those metrics that you might have are working. Or if you're doing open telemetry traces, and if you're
Right.
not practicing that every day at your desk, what are you
Right.
going to do when you need it in production? You're dead.
Amazing. So we're basically saying, like, and here's an opinion that I present, like with software, what has happened is that, and I've seen this over the ages, a lot of these practices have shifted leftwards. But the art of finding fault is still debugging in production. We haven't shifted it leftwards yet. So what I'm hearing is you're basically saying, do the same thing at home, what you're gonna do at work on your local. Start doing the similar things. If you're gonna use these debuggers, these profilers, do it on your local, but use them to inject fearing tomorrow. How am I gonna do this in production? That's is that
If
a
you
takeaway
can't do
from
it in
that?
production, you can't do it at your desk. That is the bottom line. A great
Okay,
sports analogy is what you do in practice is what you do in the game. But
amazing.
if you're practicing one thing and the game's completely different, then all the
Yeah,
practice that you've had is completely useless. You can't apply it to the game.
right. No, beautiful, Bill. That is that. I think that line about the game and the practice, I think that hit hard there. Yeah, I mean, I associate with sports, so I completely get that. This takes me to next question, and this is so natural for me to ask because there was a wave in the past decade where we kind of publicize this thing, move fast, break often, debug in production. Like I'm sure you're not new to these quotes that we kind of popularize, and a lot of engineers started following that track. And I used to hear, oh yeah, we debug in production. We ship every hour. We have to break stuff. Do you think the world has taken that a little too far with the amount of trust that we just said the software is supposed to deliver? What's your opinion on that?
This is when I start saying I'm aging out, because I do not believe in that at any level. I think I think you can run some beta software to give people an opportunity to look at things, including yourself. And you should do that if you can in a production, or at least what we call stage. Everything we do has that stage environment. It's bang on
Right.
that. Anybody can bang on stage. Because honestly, when you look at stuff at your desk, your brain is in a different place than when you look at it on stage. And then when you look at it on
Right.
production, I don't, even when I write a blog post, I'll read it 1,000 times. I'll run it locally I run the website locally and I read it. I deploy it and then I go, oh my God, how did I not see that? Because your brain just changes gears in some form or another. So we go back to this idea that you shouldn't be doing anything that's going to break production because you're dealing with people who are relying on that software. But you could most definitely have a staging environment where you give people an opportunity to start banging on. I don't get it. I mean, I wish QA departments came back, to be honest with you. I think we're asking developers to do way too much. I have never met a developer, including myself, who is really good at QA because we're afraid to find bugs. We're
Yeah.
afraid because we know that when we find it, it's about to set us back an hour and we don't want to deal with it. I think
Right.
departments, if I could create this idea of a software developer license, I would create a
Yeah.
QA license and I would make all companies have to have a QA department with licensed QA people. I would absolutely do
Right.
that. I do not believe in developers doing QA, and we got rid of
Walk
them
me
for the cost or something.
walk me deeper into this. You touch a nerve here, and it's very close to what I see. What we are saying is engineers almost fail at finding bugs. I'm gonna abstract as that because bugs have this feeling of, and even for me, like that first reaction that I get when I see a bug in my own code is of fear, is of irritation, like there's some agitation in me, like, oh no, I don't want this. So if my natural reaction is something that I do not want, you can never incentivize me to find more faults in this, right? It's almost like living in a denial. I want to live in a denial that no, there are no bugs in my system, and that's a constant state. Now with that, and also this publication of the fact that break things fast, it's almost hypocritical, right? These are two very contrasting things. You're incentivizing me to send bugs, and at the same time my fraternity kind of prohibits me from finding those bugs because that's the culture, that's the DNA that we all live in. We don't know find them, we all live in denial. And I find this very counterintuitive. And I think that is where a lot of this has gotten wrong, and marred by this beautiful point that you said a while back. The production is a different world, the local is a different world. And all of this, I don't seem to make any sense of this. And I really would want to hear other experts' opinion here. Like, how do you inculcate a culture or go against the natural conventional wisdom that the internet has been publicizing so far, or all the opinions have been coming so far? What do you tell your team? How do you convince them that this is wrong thought?
I don't know, dude. Bugs create both anxiety and a burden, but we want that anxiety and burden before that code gets into production. It's just like when people are building all these abstraction layers to the point where the compiler can't find bugs anymore. I'm like, dude,
Yeah,
you have a compiler. Break the API and let the code break at compile time. Don't like keep the API design the way it is with the idea that you don't want the compiler to break and then break some code inside the function that can only be found during production because your tests only go so far, right? Like
yeah,
this weird mentality that we have that one of you now get my latest change and I broke your build as somehow being like the worst crime on the planet. You should be almost thanking me that I broke the build because now you know that there was going to be a production bug there and that the API changed. So we might have to do something different. It's this attitude. We've got to change this attitude on the things that we said in the past were really, really bad or really not what's really, really bad. What's really, 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 really bad is a bug getting into production. It's going to happen, but that should be almost so minimal. That's a metric. I don't care about 99 percentile. It's And there's bugs, right? NASA did a study on their C and C++ code way back, and they identified that essentially there was a bug. I'm just solidifying the math here, but there's essentially a
Uh-huh.
bug with every 20 lines of code that they wrote. And
Wow.
and not every bug will rear its head, and some bugs are just super edge cases, right? But the more code you write, the more bugs that there's going to be. But we should be doing
Right.
everything we can to catch these bugs in staging in QA. Um,
Right.
and when a bug gets all, especially an obvious one, gets all the way to production, that's when we should be starting to ask ourselves, how did that happen? How did that get through?
Right.
Right? These
Right.
post mortems you see when a system goes down, whatever. Why? How did that bug get through the developers? Get through? Well, we don't have QA. That's how it got there. Oh yeah. Imagine
Right.
if we had
Right.
QA, right? Um,
Right.
it got all the way through. Like to me, that should be. If I was running an engineering team, that's how I'd be setting it up. I'd have a QA team, I'd have a staging environment, and the only one that can move something into production is the QA. QA manager has the keys to the
Right.
kingdom. No developer can access production. No developer can access staging, actually, either, because we're crazy. We see a bug, we want to fix it immediately. That creates
Right.
more
Right.
instability, right? There used to be a time when these walls were locked and one person had the keys, and you had to convince that person that this was fixed, right? Whatever you had
Right.
to do, and I think our software was more stable back then when we did this. Now,
Right.
people want to move fast and they don't care about the bugs in production. Well, guess what? I don't want to work with you. I just don't want to work with you.
You said a very a line there. I want to pick that lock, guardrail it, right? And also, as industry, we say that build fast, ship fast. A while back, you mentioned this point. Our impatience to ship software is shifting the paradigm to be more broken. Now, with all of this, uh, I want to touch upon an opinion here, and I want to hear if you resonate with this is almost saying that the best way to ship a software these days is one way is, of course, you could do an infinite amount of QA. The other way is to lock it in these parentheses of measurements. What we're literally saying is, here is a piece of software. Imagine it physically being shipped somewhere, and we are basically putting a locus or a loci of its movement. If it goes beyond this, is a problem. You're allowing it to be free and contained, but only to a certain degree, right? And you say, I'm going to ship this. If anything goes beyond or outside of these locked boundaries, I have a problem. It's a way of me getting to know that something is off, rather, like because I understand it's going to shift a little. Having precise target for every single piece of logic which works exactly the same way is tougher. I understand, with amount of functionality that we ship every day, we are adding more and more. Would you believe that uh, this this framework of basically thinking boundaries of functionality and behavior is the most uh, is a better way of shipping software into production. And what I call this is observability. And this is where observability, or the modern key term of defining reliability parameters and all of those frameworks and guardrails come into the picture. Do you think that would make it easier for people to ship software faster, and everybody on the on the stake board will be happy? Do you think that makes sense?
Yeah. So two things here. There's a sales saying that says we don't want to burn territory, right? You're trying to
Right,
sell something and you finally get a potential customer in front of you and everything's breaking. You've lost that customer for life. You might get them
right,
back only because you had some relationship. God forbid it breaks again. You're done. You're not trustworthy. I cannot
right,
rely on you, right? And you came to me
right,
with something that's broken. And so that's one of the things. I don't want to burn territory. I want to make sure that we're not. Now, I love the things that like Facebook does where they've got features there that they don't turn on, or they can turn on to a small subset of users over a small amount of
right,
time to see what's happening. I'm a big fan of that, it's a large amount of engineering effort to be able to do
Right.
that. Because
Right.
you've got to isolate. Even Google, I don't know if people know this, but Google, I'm assuming they still do this, but back in the 2000s when I was doing SEO stuff, Google has a set of servers that run the latest, greatest search engine algorithms. They're not tied
Mhm.
directly into google.com, but you can, I don't remember what the IP addresses were, but you could always go there and see what was going to happen with the next update of search because they were always feeding it and indexing it with the latest sort of algorithms, and some of those algorithms they were testing out. So it wasn't
Right.
like an A/B test on you, but they were there available for you to kind of do it. And if you work inside of Google too, there are things like the Maps app where employees are encouraged to run the latest version of that
Hmm.
first, where a company is basically beta testing everything on their employees first to make sure
Right.
things are working. If you've got a product, something like Maps that are big enough, that goes back to that staging environment. And so
Right. Right.
I think there are ways, if you really, really want to either have that um, beta or next version environment already up and running before you switch over to it, or the
Right.
idea of these feature flags where we're going to turn this on for 20% of our users and see
Right.
see
Right.
what happens, because you're burning a little bit of territory with them, but at the
Right.
same
Right.
time that could be an opt-in, which for me would be better.
Right. Right.
Would
Right.
you be willing to opt into always running on the latest greatest? Because then if it breaks, they can't complain, right?
Right.
They've agreed to help you, and they're providing you
Right.
feedback. So I think there's ways to do that, but it has to go back to that mentality that we want every user to have the best experience possible, and
Right.
we want users who are willing to help us be aware of that, so we're not burning that sort of territory. But these are engineering problems that you've got to, I think, probably. I've never built a system that can do this, by the way, can have feature flags and stuff. So I have no idea what's involved in terms of front end and back end
Right.
and ingress and all that stuff. Right? I have no idea.
Right.
I've never had to architect that. But I imagine you'd want to architect that from the beginning. But I like to keep things simple. And so I would
Right.
rather have our production site up. And then, I mean, depending on the software that you're writing, you might not be able to do this if you're doing payment gateways and stuff, right? But have that, we call it stage internally, but maybe have that
Got it.
beta.domain.com. And maybe you can
Makes sense.
reward people for logging in there and finding bugs, right? A gamification
Right.
that, and
Right.
but doing all that means that you have this real commitment to quality, knowing that there's going to be
Absolutely.
bugs, knowing there's going to be problems,
Absolutely.
and trying to minimize the pain for the majority, especially the people who just aren't that interested in there's people who don't care
Right.
about finding bugs. They're coming on you. You know how hard it is to get somebody to just go to your webpage. Isn't there some stat that says like on everybody's phone there's like 5 apps that you use every day, and everybody
Right.
else is competing to be like number 6 or something like that? Like getting an app to be installed on your phone is already huge. Get it to replace something else is almost impossible, right?
Right.
Um,
Right.
when I think about the Mastodon, which I'm not on anymore, I just didn't like the experience. There were 5 apps that were available, and I must have tried all of them, on loading, unloading, a whole 9 yards. Right? No app ever got me super excited, and I kept going back and forth between the different ones. Eventually, I said I'm done with this entire experience. But
Right.
think about those 5 people that had developed those apps, right? Competing at that point for everybody that's moving, millions of people moving to Mastodon, right? There was an
Right.
opportunity for you to be the number 1 app there. And it would be
Right.
really hard to take you off at that point if somebody felt like you were delivering that. But the moment that your app is having bugs, what's going to happen? You're gone,
Yeah.
because I'm not going to deal
Yeah.
with that experience at all. I'm not a
Right.
Facebook, right? To be an Instagram and a Facebook and a TikTok and those are
Right.
unicorns, right? You're
Right.
competing for that next thing. So
100%. Yeah.
I mean, maybe a Facebook and a TikTok, and like they don't care about the bugs because they're so ingrained at this point in everybody's life that this attitude of just deliver fast and if it breaks, nobody's walking away probably works for them. But we all know, like,
Right.
how many people could ever really claim they're at Google scale? I think it's like
Yeah.
5 companies on the planet: Twitch, maybe Netflix,
Maybe
Google,
maybe
Facebook.
three, not even
Okay,
five. Yeah.
right? Like,
Yeah.
dude, if you ever day one try to engineer a system to deal with Google scale, you are wasting a
Yeah.
large amount of your life and time. That's not where your head should be.
Well, I mean, there are only few who will be lucky to get that far. That takes me to a very important point here, Bill, and that is with so much uh, responsibility as business, and you present a very good customer side of view here, which says that, your think better work. Now, and I want to draw a parallel here. I mean, it's a thing that I coined recently, a term, and here this makes sense, and I want your opinion on this. With security, we almost took this stance to say zero trust security, a very common term where we assume that no matter which part of the system, all these layers, I assume they're going to break. I assume they're insecure. I'm going to build practices which allow me to ship that secure thing, right? And you took a stance of zero trust security. And everything around it was built with an innate distrust on a system so that I could ship the most trusted thing with reliability and with software wanting to be so reliable. I think there's a term called zero trust reliability, which is missing. A angle, a perspective where we look at a system and say, no matter what components, what aspect this is running on, I'm going to assume this is breaking. And that will help me build software which actually works better. Do you think, and because with software, we have gone, with reliability, we've gone the other way. There's an inane assumption that, oh, everything just works. I got to ship this very small piece of logic. I can quickly fix it. Nothing's going to break. Everything is going to be all right. Everything is going to be rosy and good. And we ship stuff. Do you think that the industry needs a paradigm of zero trust reliability now?
I think there's a problem with zero trust in any architecture, and that is there's a lot of redundancy and a lot of, I'll just say, performance lost, whatever the word performance might mean for that system, right?
Right,
There, at least in software architectures, when we talk about layers of software, I have learned over the years that you can't go zero trust. You have to have trust, that you have to rely on your highest layers to do all of the security and the validation. Because if not, then
right.
there's too much inefficiency as you
Understood.
move to your business layers and to your data layers. And in fact, every layer, there's less trusting work going on. The farther down you go, the more trust. Every layer has to trust the layer above at some level, where there's too much inefficiency, too much redundancy. I would imagine that you would see the same thing in one form or another in any sort of system or architecture that you're putting together. So,
Right,
if you look at what Go is now trying to do with the vulnerability tooling, right? The new fancy supply chain word that we've got everywhere. They're running a algorithm against your entire code base, looking at dependencies you're using to find
right,
vulnerabilities, right? I love that. I think that's great. That to me is an application layer sort of security check, just to validate
right,
that there's trust in the components that you're using. I would never want to
right,
build that into the software per se. So
right,
I think we have to be really careful when we talk about zero trust, because at some point you have to trust. You're trusting your operating system at some point, right? So
right,
so,
right,
so where is that line in the sand where you have a balance of comfortable enough trust and enough efficiency, um, and manageability in the system to be able to
right,
do? I don't have answers, but
right,
if I was involved, that would be the scale,
right.
right?
Understood. Makes sense. No, fair point. What you were saying is that uh, at some point there has to be an assumption of trust. Now, whether the zero trust is a part of the software or is it a part of the process is a separate thing. Like where do you draw that line? Right? Okay, it makes sense. Uh, well, in interest of time, I'm gonna actually just leave with one last question. And this has been very interesting, and this is maybe a very popular question that you have been asked 100 times over, and I want to still ask is, uh, as we're saying, software is a permanent features of our life. Engineering practices, where we agree that haven't been evolved as much to the degree of expectation that the software has from us, almost to a degree that we say, all the mundane craft of it, which we still keep arguing over, like things that were breaking 10 and 20 years back are still breaking. Uh, where we still get surprised at why is it still broken? It should have been fixed by now. I've been into this 2 decades. This stuff needs to work now. Would you say that with engineering and a lot of these practices getting slightly irrelevant, what role does AI have to play in this? You could see this question coming, but do you think uh, do you think it's gonna replace a lot of our mundane stuff that we do? Do you think it's time that we offload a lot of this code generation? Open-ended question. I have no opinions. I want to hear your opinion. What do you say as an industry veteran here?
So let's just start off with a couple statements. One, AI is not intelligence. Okay. This
Yeah,
isn't like some living organism. Two, AI is essentially building prediction models.
yeah,
So when you think about Chat GPT, whatever version, where we are today in 2023, you basically have a system that is autocomplete on steroids. That's what you
yeah.
have today. Okay.
Right,
And
right,
we're all learning, hopefully, that it can create these patterns of human readable English, but we can't necessarily trust the content. We went through this with Wikipedia, didn't we? I don't know one teacher, at least at the high school or middle school level, that will accept Wikipedia as a source, believe it or not. Though it's community content moderation, and
knowledge,
people do their best, but I've not known a teacher to ever treat it as a legitimate source. Okay.
legit source.
So
Got it.
I would never want to treat an AI system as a legitimate source of truth, which is what
Right,
we're trying to do for some reason. Now, as it relates to code, I I think at least Chat GPT, from what I've seen, has become a pretty good programmer. Remember, I draw a line in the sand between programming and engineering. Programming is find
right,
me 20 lines of code that work. Engineering is how do I integrate that in a solution where we have all
right,
that reliability, maintainability, blah, blah, blah. I think
right,
ChatGPT is turning into a really good programmer. Hey, there's an API that I need to figure out how to use. Can you show me how to pull down all the users out of Twitter for my account? And somehow magically it gives you those 20 lines of code. That is a
right,
huge time savings. Or, hey,
right,
ChatGPT, here's a function I wrote. I know it's not or even I've done it with SQL. Here's some SQL I wrote. I know there's got to be
right,
a better way to write this. And somehow,
right,
some magic, I don't know how it does it. It gives you a
right,
nicer
right,
version of it. I love
right,
it for that, but it's not
right,
making architectural engineering decisions. You're needing to do that. You know you need a SQL that does this. You know
right,
you've written a
right,
version of it that works. It's now more, hey, can you optimize this? Maybe you can't. Or I don't want to spend 20 minutes searching through 20 blog posts, find the 20 lines of code I
right,
need to learn how to write a Rego script that does this. I think there's huge benefit in terms of time
right,
saving on the programming side. The problem is
right,
the moment somebody treats that as engineering, it gets
right,
really and that problem exists already today. I can find the 20 lines of code in a blog post and just move it in. So
right.
we're not solving that. We're not
But
making the problem
how
worse.
do I bring that in?
We're not
Right,
making that worse. Okay. But I think for these types of things right now, these AI, Chat GPT, large language models are amazing. Like, and
right,
leverage it. Like, you should be leveraging it for that. Now,
right,
do I think that will ever get to a point where it's building. I don't think it could ever build the engineering code. You know why? Because it can't fix the bugs. And so if you don't have the mental model of the code and the architecture behind that code, you can't maintain it. You can't find and fix the bugs. You still have that responsibility. Because at that point, then it shouldn't have written a bug. Whoa, how did you write a bug? And now you're finding the bug? Like there's a problem there, right? So maybe not in my lifetime, maybe 50, 20 years, 25, maybe more. I don't know. But for where it is right now, dude, it's freaking crazy. The predictivity, how it can predict things at a certain level. I have zero clue. I've tried to look. I've learned how it does the prediction. We actually wrote some code in Go that implements a very small implementation of Chat GPT. Go didn't have all the libraries that we needed, like there are in Python, so it was a little bit of a struggle. So I have a conceptual understanding of how Chat GPT works with text. I have zero clue how it does it with code, man. That is wild. But you should use it as a sidekick programmer for sure, that you're copying and pasting.
I like the word there. Let me summarize it then. I mean, I think we violently agree on this one. And my summarization of that is, I have this hope that using it as a sidekick pair programmer, as you said, my assumption and my hope and my expectation is that it actually brings engineering back to the fore, where our time is spent better paying attention to things that matter and help us shape a reliable software. Because I think a lot of us get so consumed into daily sprints, velocity, that it actually leaves very little time to take a step back and understand where are the structural faults. Ask a question that where is it going to break? I think it should allow us more bandwidth to be able to ask those rightful questions. So my hope and my assumption is that it actually improves the software engineering landscape. And overall, I really like that you resonate with the fact, and there are other engineering leaders who are so passionate about shipping reliable experiences through this software that is all around us right now. Even over this call, ordered air conditioner that just stopped working over my head. Thanks a lot, Will.
This call has not had any hiccups for the last hour, right? It's an air conditioner right now.
Don't jinx it. Cool. Thank you, Prathamesh, so much for having us. Will, it was lovely to chat with you. This has been good. I got so many nuggets here that you've actually told me, and they're wonderful.
Awesome. Thanks for having me today. It's cool.
Thank you. Have a good day.